You are now listening to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. We preserve the history and sport of hunting through curious conversation and action-packed hunts, as well as offering you tips and strategy for more successful hunts. Welcome to Deer Science Month.
The goal of this series is to break down the science behind the different senses of a whitetail deer to make us better hunters.
We're going to be talking to some of the best deer biologists across the country about topics like deer vision, smell, hearing, taste, and we'll even throw in cool topics like, does culling deer actually work? The difference between CWD and EHD, and we'll talk about some GPS collar research. So anything you want to know about deer science and biology, hopefully we're going to cover it in this series. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. This is episode number 155. Today we are joined by Kip Adams of the National Deer Associations. He's a Chief Conservation Officer for the NDA. Kip, thanks for joining us on the podcast, and I've been thinking about it. I think this has got to be at least your third time on the show, so I really appreciate it, you coming on over the years.
Pleasure. So you do a nice job with it, and I'm glad to be here.
So you jumped on during a very interesting time. We're in week 3 of our 4-week Deer Science Month that we're doing. And the topic that we wanted to cover with you was a whitetail deer sense of smell, which is a really interesting. And if you've been hunting long enough, you know it's one that you hate to get busted by because it seems to happen very often to me. But before we jump into that, can you give us a little bit of a background into maybe your education, your hunting experience, and then kind of how you ended up working for NDA, this great organization for deer?
Sure. I'm from northern Pennsylvania originally, so I grew up, as a deer hunter in a deer hunting family. I have always been very interested in wildlife, and grew up with a turkey call in my mouth. We always had bears around us. There was always upland birds to chase. So just a really good area to be from. If you're a kid that's interested in the woods and in hunting. So I learned early on, hey, there's a job called a wildlife biologist. That sounds like exactly what I want to do. So got out of high school, I got my undergraduate degree at Penn State University in wildlife and fishery science. Went on to the University of New Hampshire to get a graduate degree in wildlife because it's such a competitive field that without a graduate degree, the opportunities are really limited and what you're going to be able to do in this field. So got that degree. And at that time, almost all of the jobs in wildlife were either for a state or federal agency. Now, I came out of graduate school in the mid 90s, so it's a very different time than today. But that was it. There weren't all the consulting jobs. All of that didn't exist at that time. So went to work for the state of Florida. It was a great job. Wildlife biologist in Central Florida. I was there for 4 years. Then I went back to New Hampshire. And I went to work for New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. I ran the state's deer and bear programs, which was another great job. And it was there that I learned about the QDMA at that time. I became a member immediately. And you know what? I always knew at some point that I wanted to get back to Pennsylvania. I spent a decade in New Hampshire and Florida, and we still had our family farm in Pennsylvania. I still came to Pennsylvania every year to go deer hunting. And while I was a QDMA member, I saw in the Quality Whitetails magazine the very first posting for a QDMA job in the Northeast. It was a regional director based out of Pennsylvania. And I thought that has my name written all over it. So I applied, I got it. Since then, there's been a merger. So QDMA is now called the National Deer Association. But I've been working for them for just over 21 years now. So, or actually just under 21, it'll be 21 years here in a couple months. So anyway, it has been a great ride. I love the organization. I love what I do for them. And I'm a very, very lucky guy for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. NDA is an awesome organization. I was actually looking through our messages when I was sending you a link to this podcast, and there were several stories that I had tagged you in that were QDMA, and that was like, oh, that was a few years back. If it's still got that name. So that's awesome. It sounds like you've had a decorated career, and you are definitely a qualified person to talk about this sense of the whitetail. So like we talked about earlier, the goal of the series is we're trying to break down these senses to help us become better hunters, because might as well go to the woods armed with as much information as possible, because these critters are really hard to chase and even harder to kill. So if you had to talk about the deer sense of smell and maybe put a guess out there in your hunting career, how many times do you think you've been flat out busted just because of a deer's nose and the ability to smell you?
Oh, way more than I would like to share with your listeners here. So I've been busted a lot scouting, a lot hunting. The thing is, and I understand, just how important that is to deer and how well they use it. So there's times though that you're just not going to be able to beat it. You might be able to beat it from some deer that are coming from the direction you want, but deer come from many different ways. So the story on a deer's nose is, they're very good at avoiding predation. They're a prey species, so they're built to wake up every morning and wonder, what's going to try to eat me today, and how am I going to stay away from them? So they're really, really good at that. And the nose is the number one way that they do that. So fortunately I have beat their nose in many cases, but I'm sure there's way more that they have gotten me.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm in the same boat. Is there something that you kind of starting at a high level that people don't understand, or maybe is a common misconception, or is the nose of a whitetail really this impenetrable wall that we should just give up altogether trying to defeat, or is it something that we can defeat with the right tactics?
Well, there's definitely tactics that we can do and use to help ourselves, get within gun range or within bow range of a deer. As far as, is it totally defeatable? I mean, there's no way we can make ourselves completely scent free where when the wind is blowing from us to deer that it's not going to smell us. Now, there are certainly things that we can do to help mask that scent. There are things that we can do to keep our scent from going from us to where deer are. So there's a lot of hunting strategy involved relative to beating the nose. But that's a pretty powerful tool they have, to smell not only us, but all of the other critters out there, that are trying to eat them as well.
If you had to describe just how good can a deer actually smell, like in human terms, maybe something that's easy to understand, is there any research or quantifiable data to tell us, hey, they smell X% better relative to us or relative to a dog? How would you describe that?
You can read every fall, lots of outdoor writers will put down, an actual number of times better they can, smell than us. I've seen 50,000, I've seen 100,000, I've seen 1,000,000 times better. The reality of it is we don't know exactly. And if you take all of the researchers who have looked at this over the years, Dr. Carl Miller, who's now retired from the University of Georgia, he by far is the world-renowned expert on this, with scent, research. Dr. Gino D'Angelo now is at UGA, then it is taking over this research. So those guys by far are the top people with regard to being able to answer that. And I've had this conversation with Dr. Miller lots and lots of times. And Carl has told me flat out, nobody knows, Kip. People will write about it. People will guess. Nobody knows for sure. But what we do know is that it is way, way better than certainly than what we have. And part of it is because people will look at a deer, and they see that black thing on the end of their face and they say, okay, there's the deer's nose. Well, yeah, that's the exterior part of it. But if you cut into a deer's skull, their actual nose or all those receptors that they use to actually detect scent, they will run from that black part at the end on the deer that you can see here behind me, all the way up that long nose into the brain. But it's not a straight line. It is, it goes around, and it's all of these variations around and around. And every one of those little curves has all of these sensory receptors on it. So the amount that they have is way more than just the length of what their head is. So because of that, we don't know exactly, but we do know it is infinitely better than what we're able to smell because of all of the additional receptors. But then also they can use those differently. We can smell, perfume on a girl or cologne on a guy, or we smell the milk to see that, does this smell bad or not? At the end of the day, though, regardless of what our capability is, in most cases, our life doesn't depend on it. So we don't use that information to the same degree that deer do. Deer have the ability to smell in a much wider area there. And their life depends on it every single day. So they not only can smell more things, they put way more interest into that. So because of that, we know that it is far, far better than we can, but there is not a number that we can absolutely associate to it. Even though you can read about that a lot, in hunting articles as we get close to the hunting season this fall. But I can confidently say there is not a number that we can associate with that. And that comes from the top researchers.
That's interesting. I mean, it makes for a good article when you can say 50,000 times better or 1,000,000 times better. But that's so interesting to me because, like you were saying, I can smell body odor or rotten milk or something like that. It might be a minor inconvenience to me, but the difference for a deer is their ability to smell odor from a certain gland, or is maybe the ability to find a mate or continue their bloodline or something like that. It's so interesting to me. Like these blood tracking dogs are tracking, scent from a gland in between the interdigital gland. I think it is in between the toes. Like their nose is survival to them. And it's just so interesting to me how good they are at it, and just how much better they are than us, because it seems like evolutionarily they have to have that or they wouldn't survive. We don't need it.
That's right. And we're a visual species. The way that our eyes are set, in front of our face, the visual acuity that we have, we see the world through our eyes. Deer see the world through their nose, with regard to smelling predators, to identifying individuals, within deer, even finding food. If you were under, say, you're in an oak forest and there's acorns all over the ground, as we walk through, if I said, hey, Christian, go pick up a bunch of acorns or go find some, you would see them and pick them up. If a deer goes there to feed, they're not looking for them, they're smelling for them. And when I was at graduate school at UNH, I worked at our deer research facility. We had captive deer that we had all kinds of research on. We would collect acorns in the woods, and take them to feed the deer, basically as a treat for the deer, in our pens. And it's amazing. They would nose through them, smell, and would literally knock some out of the way with their nose to get to others. And they would end up looking like, man, I would like more. But there would be a bunch on the ground. It'd be like, hey, you still have a bunch left. But if you took those ones they didn't eat and actually cracked them, in almost every case, you would find that they were full of worms, or they were rotten, or there was something the matter with them. So even within a bunch of acorns that look exactly the same to me or you, deer could tell which ones were good to eat and which ones were not, based entirely on smell. So they use that, in that sense, way more than most people, and even than most hunters realize. We think about them as smelling us and staying away from us, but they're using it in many cases to identify a food source. And then even when they get to that food source, to identify between different individuals or different pieces within that food source of ones that are better than others. So it's pretty amazing exactly how strong that sense of smell is.
So you're telling me if a deer's walking through the woods with its nose on the ground, and it could differentiate between a pin oak, a white oak, a red oak, just from the smell of those acorns and the different type of smell that they produce. They can differentiate to that level with smell.
They can differentiate through that, which is one of the reasons, that even just with them identifying different individual deer, research from the University of Georgia has identified the forehead gland in deer, particularly mature bucks. During the rut, there is a lot of increased glandular activity there. We can measure this with machines. Researchers have identified nearly 50 different specific pieces of information that deer can share through that forehead gland. When bucks are rubbing this on trees, when other individuals are smelling that. So we don't know what all of those different pieces mean, but if we can measure the differences in all of those, we know this is what one of the things that deer are using to collect information on each other. I can look at you and say, oh, that's Christian. A deer could not do that. A deer could come smell you and be like, oh, that's Christian. Mm-hmm. And then we believe that, through this information they're sharing, forehead gland, other pheromones in our bodies, that deer likely then can also tell dominant status with other deer, nutritional status, all of these different pieces of information they can tell about others strictly through, sense of smell. So we, as humans, we can't even begin to get into any of that. I can't look at you and say, geez, is he, dominant over other males in his area, or how nutritionally fit is he? I can look at you exterior and be like, ooh, he probably, looks like he works out, or, ooh, looks like he's a couch potato. I can't tell a lot in between there. Deer can identify very specific things, about individuals within there. So yes, they can identify differences, within food they're eating, differences, within individual deer, in their area, or deer that have moved into the area that they don't know. And then certainly all the different predator smells that come through there as well. So there's a lot going on, that they're filtering through with that. We see the world through our eyes. They see the world through their nose, and, life and death depends on it every day for them. Not necessarily so for us.
One of the interesting things that I've kind of learned and just had click in my brain going through this series is understanding deer vision and realizing how much they more rely on their nose for survival versus vision. Makes me think about my hunting strategy and my approach. And if the deer kind of view their world through the lens of their nose, it makes me put even a higher priority in these areas where they are leaving these scent, like scrapes, scrape lines, rub lines, these sort of things. How does the sense of smell play into those sort of things in terms of your hunting strategy? Do you like to target those areas with scrapes and all these places deer are laying down scent because it's a active area, or how do you kind of think about that?
I love to scout in those areas, and scout particularly with the camera. Scrapes especially, but rubs also. These are ways that deer are communicating. And they're essentially like, the community bulletin board where people used to hang a business card, but, it's like the chat room today where everybody goes there to see who's there and what's going on. This is essentially what deer are doing, at these rubs and scrapes. We used to think, from a rub standpoint that, yeah, those bucks are just getting that velvet off their antlers because they're rubbing the tree to do it. Well, yeah, a little bit, but it's way more than that. More importantly than just getting the velvet off, they are rubbing those trees, and it often breaks the cambium layer. So it's a visual thing for animals to see, and it also releases aromatics from that tree if it's a tree like a pine or something that is very aromatic. So it alerts deer to that. Then those bucks will rub their forehead gland on it. They're not doing that because they itch. They're doing that because they're leaving their information there. This is who I am. This is my, dominant status. This is all of this information. And that's why other bucks that will come through, they check that rub out. They go up and smell it. Who's been here? How long ago was it? Who's in the area? What's going on? That's how they share information. So that's essentially, their form of social media. It's how they're communicating with other deer in the area and deer outside of the area that come through. Same thing with scrapes. First thing a deer will do at a scrape is they will mark that overhanging branch. And if you watch, they'll lick it. They rub their preorbital gland on it. They often lick it some more. They get just the right scent on there that they want. Then they will either paw that ground below it, or if there's already a scrape there, they might clean it out some, may or may not urinate in it. But this is all a scent communication strategy. They're leaving information about themselves that's there, as well as collecting information from other deer. And this is why does use scrapes as well. They smell it. In many cases, does will also urinate in these scrapes. We have video of, or researchers do, of does at rubs, rubbing their genitals on the rub on the tree where bucks have rubbed. They're leaving their scent there. So there's all kinds of communication going on in the deer world. Deer are far more social than most people realize. They're communicating all the time. They don't call you on the cell phone, or talk like we are here on the computer, but they do it through scent being left at primarily rubs and scrapes. And that's why a certain scrape is not just for that buck. That's for all deer in that area to be able to come and check. Bucks and does will come and routinely check those. And the same with rubs. We talk about a rub line. And at one point, we used to think about that as that buck's rub line. That's not true at all. Put cameras on them, multiple bucks will rub every one of those rubs. And sometimes you have what looks like a rub line where you'll have a few bucks rubbing the ones on this side, and then the other trees right in that line, a whole different group of bucks rubbing. Bucks aren't territorial. They're not protecting them. It's just a place where they can leave information and then check information on others who have been in the area. And this stuff goes on every single day in the deer's woods, all the way around the clock and around the calendar.
Yeah, I could see this game of leapfrog in scrapes and rubs, right? Like one buck comes in and leaves his scent, and does are coming to that area, and like, oh, there are other bucks coming in this area. This is the big dog in this area now. How often or how long does that scent last on either a scrape or a rub? And the reason I ask that is from a hunting perspective. If you would think these deer have to come in and continually lay that scent down. That's not a one-time thing. How can we take advantage of that from a hunting perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. One is the length of time that it stays there really depends on the environmental conditions. Really hot and really dry conditions, scent just doesn't last as long. Think about anybody who's hunting with dogs, whether you're hunting upland birds or bear or blood trailing or whatever. If it's really hot and dry, the scent molecules just don't stay there as long. Far more difficult to pick up the scent of stuff going on in the area. Conversely, if it's the moisture is higher, humidity is a little bit higher, man, that scent hangs around a lot longer, way easier for those dogs to follow something. Same thing with deer, at these areas. So, the scent may stay there a day. It may stay there several days. If they go in and urinate in a scrape or check a scrape and we get a pounding thunderstorm overnight, it probably washes a bunch of that scent away. So they're back to refresh it even sooner. So the environment has a big impact on how long it stays. But from a hunting standpoint, we know deer are going to these areas. So that's why I said it's a great way or a great place to scout with a trail camera, if that's legal where you are. And gosh, unfortunately, they're becoming more illegal, it seems, about every day in some places. But they don't necessarily make great places to hunt. And the reason I say that is because research shows that about 84% of scrape use occurs at night. So not all of it. And a lot of people have certainly killed deer over scrapes. And so they don't need to call me up and send me hate mail to say that's not true. 84% at night. That still means that 16% is during the daylight. So what I tell people is, man, if you like to hunt scrapes and it works, keep doing it. However, just realize that most of the visitation to those areas does occur at night. Now, doesn't mean you don't use that to your advantage. Let's absolutely use that from a hunting standpoint. Say, if I know there's a really fresh scrape in this area or a series of scrapes, and over here to my left is a really good thick bedding area, and these scrapes are kind of off to my right down in here, where am I going to be? I don't want to be on those scrapes hunting, but I absolutely will be back between where that good cover is and where those scrapes are, and I will catch those deer going to those scrapes, in the afternoon, or leaving those scrapes coming back to cover, in the morning. So I think we absolutely should use that data, to help us during the hunting season. I just personally don't spend very much time actually hunting over top of the scrape.
That's good insight. You talked about something, environmental factors, how in the heat the scent kind of dissipates a little more. Is there any just natural conditions that maybe across the country, different habitats we're going to see that are better to jam a whitetail's nose? Is it higher humidity, or after or during a rain, it's easier to beat a whitetail's nose? Is there anything like that we can derive from any research?
Not really. And the reason for that is there's a bunch of movement research with deer relative to different, environmental conditions, rain periods, moon phases, wind, barometric pressure, all kinds of stuff. And today, because we have GPS collars that literally collect, data, they can collect it every 15 minutes around the year. So we have research projects with over 500,000 data points of deer movement that then they can go and compare to barometric pressure, rain, wind, all these kind of things. And the environment does not impact deer movement nearly as much as many hunters think, or as much as some writers write about. So having said that, I'm not aware of any specific environmental condition that really jams up a deer's nose more than anything else. Think about the different places that deer live. They live from Canada all the way down to South America. They live in areas that are, almost tundra, down completely forested, completely unforested, deserts, and a little bit of everywhere in between. They're North America's #1 game animal, partly because they are so darn adaptable, and so good at surviving that they can live in all of these different environments. So because of that, I am not aware of anything that says there's a certain condition that really jams it up. I think it has more to do with wherever you are within the whitetails range, anything that is outside of normal conditions. So for example, where I am in Pennsylvania, if we get, I'm in north central Pennsylvania, mountains with agriculture in the valleys in between, if we get wind speeds of 15 to 20 miles an hour during our bow season, that almost stops deer movement, in many cases, because that is not normal for us at all. Normal wind speeds are much more in that, 5 to 10 mile an hour range. So you get up to 15 to 20, that is a big difference. That is a notable change in deer movement. When I go to visit my buddy in North Dakota and hunt with him each year, the wind is never less than 15 miles an hour. Those deer don't care a bit if it's 15 or 20. If it gets to 30 or 40, now that stops that movement or really slows it down. So it's not so much just the wind or a certain speed. I think it has to do more with conditions that are outside of what's normal for deer in that specific area. And I have seen that in places throughout the United States and Canada that I've been able to work and hunt. And that's not proven scientifically anywhere. I can't give you an example, of a university study that shows it, but I have seen that time and time again. And I'm a firm believer in that. Deer are so adaptable. So, it's just if you get things that are outside of what is normal for them, that is when they really cue in on that, and then some of their behavior changes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Staying in that same vein of the wind, you'd think from a whitetail's sense of smell perspective that playing the wind would be common knowledge across the country, but I don't really think that it is in a lot of places. But before I started broadening like my hunting influences and hunting with different people and consuming content, I had never played the wind up until about 5 years ago. Granted, I wasn't very successful for the first 15 years that I was hunting, and have got a heck of a lot more successful in the last 5. But, at a 50,000 foot level, can you explain to someone in simple terms what playing the wind actually is and why we play the wind and why that's advantageous for trying to beat a whitetail's nose?
Sure. Wherever you are, there's going to be, some wind. It might be very, very slight and very still, or, it might be blowing pretty hard, but it's going to come from some direction and blow to another direction. So a north wind, for example, comes from the north and blows toward the south. Now, in general, if you are hunting and the wind is coming from the north, it is to your advantage to position yourself south of where you think the deer will come from, because you want that wind to blow to the deer, past the deer to you, and then keep going. That way your scent is downwind from those deer. There's less of a chance that they will smell you. And depending on the environment and the terrain and all that, deer can smell you anywhere from, certainly if they're up close, they can smell you, but they can smell you 100, 200, 300 yards away, or even more in some cases. So that's why from a hunting end, it is, in my opinion, one of the most important things to consider is wind direction and where you think deer will come from. Then you put yourself in the best spot. So what we just said there, let's say it's a north wind again, and you are upwind from where you think deer will come from. That means the wind is coming, leaving, going to you, and then from you to the deer. What that means is they likely are going to smell you way before you ever see them, and then either not show up and you'll never even know they're there, or you can hear them blowing, or doing something to let you know, oh yeah, they smell me. They're not coming here now. They know there's a predator here. So playing the wind just means trying to get yourself downwind of where you expect to see deer to minimize the chances that they will smell you. There's a lot of things that we can do to do that, or to help with that. One is to just pay attention to where the wind is coming from, and then try to set yourself up below where you expect deer to be from. Now, In some cases, let's talk about the Midwest. We have a very small area where we know they are bedding because it's all crop fields around it, and there's a little bit of timber in an area. We can be pretty sure most deer are bedded there. We can do an easier job getting ourselves downwind of that. Go to the Northeast where it's almost all forested. Even though we may have a good spot where deer bed, they can be anywhere through those woods. So even if you are beating the nose of the deer that are in a certain bedding area, there's a good chance that deer can be, still downwind from you as well, and you'll get busted. So it's not a game that you win every time. But you're just trying to put the odds in your favor, to be able to get a deer within gun or bow range. And people, will take scent-free showers. They will wash clothes in scent-free stuff to help remove your scent. People will use all kinds of scent reduction techniques, to be able to get a little closer. And that's a good thing. I think that all helps us. When I started hunting 40 years ago, we didn't think about that at all. I hunted out of a very traditional deer camp where everybody got up in the morning, the wood stove is going, almost everybody was smoking cigarettes, you're cooking bacon, you got your hunting clothes on, you eat breakfast, and you go to the woods smelling exactly like camp. Now, did we kill deer? Sure, you can still kill deer, but there's a much greater chance of seeing more deer if you're not in that environment. Today at our hunting camp, nobody's smoking inside. We still do have a wood stove, but people's hunting clothes are either on the porch or in scent-free places. So, when we go to the woods today, we are bringing way less scent with us, and we are much smarter about setting up in an area to not be, downwind from deer. Us being downwind from deer. We don't want the deer to be downwind from us. So it's something that's looked at way more strategically today, Christian, than 10 years ago, and certainly more than 20 or 30 years ago. Now, people will say, you know what? I smoke cigarettes while I'm hunting and I still kill deer. And you know what? My dad did for years. I sat with him, sucking his cigarette secondhand smoke while he killed a bunch of deer. So it's not to say it can't happen, but you are definitely putting the odds more in your favor if you're not out there smoking or have that other scent with you, and you really pay attention to what the wind is doing. So can't beat the deer's nose every time, but the more things you can do to just tip the odds in your favor, the more likely you are to getting closer to more deer, and especially more mature deer.
So let's talk about those areas where wind tends to swirl. We hunt a lot in the southern portion of Oklahoma, and there's a couple different mountain ranges. You get in these areas where 1 second it is northeast real hard and southwest 5 minutes later, and you're getting blown at. What do you do in kind of maybe your setup, or how do you approach it or think about it in these areas where wind isn't a constant direction like it is in maybe the Midwest? Like we hunted Kansas last year, and it was, man, if the wind said something in those flat areas, it was typically doing that. But you go to the southern portion of Oklahoma, it's not that way. How do you approach that?
Yeah, you know what? It's the same in a lot of mountainous areas like that. Where I'm at in north central Pennsylvania, we will take every single stand that we have, look at a map and figure out what is the best wind to hunt this from. What are winds you would not hunt this from? And then I have a chart of every single stand and a yes or no on will we hunt this in this wind condition. But then once we actually hunt that, we will make note of, okay, my weather.com says in Knoxville, Pennsylvania, the wind is out of the west right now. I get to that stand. Let's see, based on the terrain around this stand, even though we know the wind is generally coming from the west, am I actually getting a west wind from this stand or not? Because that can be impacted by terrain, especially any mountains that are there can help block or divert that wind. So gullies or rivers can pull, scent, and actually can change where your scent is going based on whatever wind is projected. So look at what you would think would be on a map, but definitely check those once you're there actually scouting or when you're actually hunting. We have some stands that, a west wind, when you get there, even a west wind at my house, if I'm hunting a half mile away in that stand, a west wind is actually a north wind. That's where that comes from because of the terrain features. So we make notes of all of that stuff so that, we can be smarter the next time that we hunt that. So, that is absolutely something that I encourage folks to do. Just developing a wind chart for all of your stands, making you think through, could I hunt this on a northwest wind? Yes or no? Could I hunt this on a north wind, a northeast, an east, a southeast? All of that will make you a better hunter because, one, you will do a better job setting that stand up. And two, it'll keep you from being foolish and hunting it when you shouldn't. Because we all have our favorite stands, or myself included. There's spots I'm like, oh, I so badly want to go to this stand today. And I'll get the wind report and be like, oh, that's not the right wind. And I think, you know what? Maybe it won't be. No, don't do that. If it's not the right wind, don't go, and mess something up. So developing that wind chart will help you it'll keep you from making more foolish decisions about hunting a place when you shouldn't. But then it allows you to actually ground check that when you're there. And then, so if I get to a spot that says a west wind is good, we have a west wind, I get there and realize, ooh, the wind actually, when it's coming from the west, I'm actually getting a north wind here. That's not good for this. That makes me smarter about hunting that the next time. Like, I won't hunt that on that. So I think that is way more looked at today than ever before. It's one of the reasons we're killing more older bucks than ever before. People are just being smarter, about where they're hunting, because as soon as we alert these deer to know that they're being hunted, it makes it way harder to get within gun range and certainly within bow range. So, but terrain features have a big, big impact on that. Flat land with nothing, no mountains or real tall trees around it, it's the easiest to get a continuous wind. As soon as you start adding tall trees, rivers, gullies, ravines, mountains, all of that starts to change a little bit. It's not difficult for anybody to figure it out. It just takes, a little bit of ground truthing on your part and a little bit of homework to figure out like which wind should you hunt. So that's something that's very doable for everybody, Christian. And fortunately, more hunters are doing that today, and they're reaping the benefits because of it.
The Hunter's Advantage podcast is powered by Out on a Limb Manufacturing. Out on a Limb is a family-owned company based right here in Oklahoma that makes tree stands, saddle platforms, climbing sticks, and so much more.
Christian, I have a quick question.
What's that?
What bites down harder, a hippo or an alligator?
No idea.
It's a trick question. The Ridge Runner 2.0 bites harder than both of them. But all jokes aside, we use these products all across the land on public or private. These help us get into any tree we want and hunt where the deer actually are.
Most men go to the grocery store for their meat, but these products help you go to God's grocery store. I have used the Out on a Limb Ridge Runner 2.0 and the Shakar sticks for the last few years hunting public land bucks, and I've actually shot several bucks out of this setup. If you want to support the podcast and get some Out on a Limb equipment, make sure to go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 for 10% off at checkout. Once again, if you want to support the podcast, go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 at checkout for 10% off. Now let's get back to the podcast. Yeah, what I'm hearing is trust the weatherman on the first one, but verify every single spot individually. And I think that's great advice. And let's talk a little bit about scent control. We have an entire industry devoted to beating a whitetail's nose. It feels like with scent control regimens and all the products that come out, it seems that they come out every single year. There's something new. I want to get this out of the way right off the top. Is a good scent control or even a religious scent control regimen an excuse not to play the wind from your perspective?
No, it's not. Nope, not at all. Because even with the best stuff that's out there, and there's some really good stuff out there to help, nothing is completely foolproof. There's nothing that we can do that will, remove 100% of your scent or mask 100% of your scent all the time. Now, I think by being very regimented with that stuff, you can get away with some things that the person who's not doing that can't. So, for example, if it's the wind is not quite in your favor, almost, but not quite, you can get away on more of those edgy situations. And sometimes some of the mask stuff or cover scent stuff might allow you a little bit longer opportunity to get a shot at a deer that's within range. Think about how many times you've had a deer, in range that boy, it was nervous. It just wasn't quite stopping. It wouldn't quite give me a broadside shot, whatever the case is. Sometimes if you're more regimented with that scent control, you get an extra half second or maybe an extra 2 seconds before he or she bolts. So I think that there's absolutely value in using those. And you're not going to beat everyone every time, but there are definitely advantages if you enjoy, going to that degree to try to cover your scent.
So I've seen some studies and I've read them on the internet, whether they're just folks in articles writing stuff that they made up or there are any facts behind them, I don't know. But I've seen that I've read that there's hundreds of human odor molecules and that some scent control products can cover up 20% of them, 30% of them. There's this thing talking about activated carbon. You've heard and probably consumed a lot of the research of Carl Miller and Gino D'Angelo. What do we have out there in terms of scent control research to quantify? How much can we eliminate? Is there anything out there that can tell us that?
There's nothing that tells us the exact amount that we can eliminate. There's lots of claims by different products on what they can. To my knowledge, none of those are scientifically verified. You're right. Carl Miller and Gino would be the ones that would know that, or probably the ones that would have done that research. So with those, there's nothing that blocks all of our stuff, or even if you're completely scent free when you go out, we're producing scent every second of the day. So, there's other. So what I tell people is hunting is fun. Let's be as smart as we can about what we're doing, but continue to have fun with this. I have friends that are regimented to the nth degree with scent control. That's part of the hunting process for them. They love that. They do that and they're successful. I have other friends that don't enjoy being regimented to the nth degree. So if they have to do that, it takes away from the hunt. They're not having as much fun. So I tell them, you're insane then if you do that and purposely take away from your hunting enjoyment, because those friends can be just as successful, as some of my other friends. So what I tell people is, hey, these are the things we know. Deer can smell way better than we can. Let's be smart about where we position ourselves, when we're hunting. Let's do what we can to cover our scent, but let's do it in a way that we enjoy and is part of the fun in the hunting process. Personally, for me, I wash my clothes in scent-free detergent. I keep them in plastic totes. I do all of that I can to minimize my scent. I do not take a shower in scent-free soap and shampoo every time before I go hunting. Sometimes I do, but it's not like, can't go hunting today because I don't have my scent-free shampoo with me. I'm not to that degree. I have used scent control products out there like ozonics when I've hunted before. I think that absolutely can help mask your scent. Sometimes I just don't want to carry all that extra weight, and hook that stuff up when I'm there. Sometimes I just want to be a darn predator and just try to be as light as possible and slip through the woods. So it's part of what I enjoy. It's part of the hunt that I want to experience that day. So I tell people, if you really enjoy doing all of that, then absolutely do it. If you don't do it and have that take away from your hunting experience, because you still can be successful, particularly if you're smarter about where you're setting yourself up, and eliminating all movement or as much movement as possible while you're hunting, so that the deer aren't beating you with their eyes as well.
Yeah,
so continue to have fun. You go to the degree that you want with it, but have fun.
I agree with you. I think that's a great message. I've kind of adapted this blended approach where if I have it, I'll use it. If I have that bottle of scent eliminator in the back of my truck, I will definitely spray it on. But I've found more freedom in just finding on my private pieces a bulletproof wind direction, or not bulletproof. None of them are ever just fully bulletproof, but from my perspective, a great wind direction to hunt on private. And on public, when I'm hunting in these areas of swirly wind, I'll spray a little bit of scent control and go on. And yeah, I'm still going to get blown at. But like you said, the bedding areas in these portions of southern Oklahoma, the deer bed everywhere. There's an 8-foot tall grass all over the place. So I've taken a lot of freedom of saying, if I don't have that, I'm not handcuffed. I used to feel that way. I went out and I didn't have my scent control on. I'm like, well, might as well not even go out tonight. And I don't feel that way anymore.
Areas that you reference where the wind just swirls and you don't, that's a great place to just stay out of, particularly if the wind is like that. deer often want to be there because they can be everything that's else. They often feel comfortable about being there. And if that's the case, I will use that to my advantage as a hunter, knowing that's where they will be. That's where they're going to bed. Now, I just need to put myself between that and wherever they want to go. If I have the ability to manage that land, I can do something with a food source away from that and hunt them in between. If I don't have the ability to manage that land, well, then let's find a food source or a good place they want to be. I don't want to go in there and alert them to my presence, but I like it that it's an area like that I know they will be, because I absolutely can use that information to my advantage and kill them going there or coming from there. And I think that's something, that the hunters definitely need to take advantage of, because we clearly can use that to get us closer to deer.
So Kip, if we assume that every hunter had an unlimited amount of funds in their bank account and they could buy every single scent control product on the market, like the hair spray, the gel, washing their clothes in it, using a scent eliminator, putting them they have the scent eliminating totes now. Would you recommend that to somebody if it didn't take away from the enjoyment of their hunt, taking every single precaution? Do you think that those kind of stack up exponentially and just add to better chances?
Don't forget the gum. Scent,
there you go.
Free or scent control gum. I think the answer is, if you got all this stuff, you had the ability to get all of that, or it was all given to you free, and you like to use it, absolutely use it. There's nothing wrong with that. And in many cases, each of those can help. I think the bigger part of that is, if somebody cares enough to do all of those things, he or she also is likely way more in tune with what's going on in the woods, careful about where they're walking, how quiet they are. They are just so much more invested into the hunt that it's not just the scent control part of it, but they likely are being better at all of the other aspects of the hunt as well, compared to the person who has bacon grease all over them, and smoking a cigarette and just goes haphazardly through the woods. So I don't think it's the scent control products, all of those, that by themselves make them more successful. But I think that's one part of the entire hunt. And if they care that much, or they're attuned to that much detail with those, they probably are more finely tuned to all of the other details of the hunt, which will help make them more successful.
That's a good point. One thing I did want to talk to you about is, since deer's sense of smell is so good, I feel like a lot of folks, and I feel like I did this to myself many seasons before I started having better success rate, was running my season before it started with the intrusion that I put in, going in, checking my cameras, wanting to do little projects, hang stands, make micro adjustments and all my stuff. Do you think the scent that we leave behind through a lot of visits to our properties before the season has a pretty detrimental effect on the deer knowing or smelling or sensing us being there?
Absolutely. Deer are so much more attuned to our presence and our behavior and movements than we are to theirs in most cases. So, and there is research that shows this. So, like, once we have entered an area like that, our scent that's there, regardless if we saw a deer or not, just the fact that our scent is there can change deer movement patterns for 2 to 3 days afterwards. So, whether you are there checking a camera or actually hunting, it doesn't matter to the deer. It's not like the deer say, "Oh, Christian's but he's just checking a camera. He's not hunting today. It's okay to go." They don't care. It's just something is there or not. And if something is there, they register that presence, and it impacts, how they move. And it doesn't take a lot of that to suddenly, we're just not moving as much in the daytime anymore, or we're not going over there at all because we keep having repeated scents in there. So yes, our movements and our behavior dramatically impacts our chances of seeing deer, and dramatically impacts deer movement patterns, time of day they're moving, where they're moving, etc. A great study out of Maryland several years ago looked at a private property. It was owned by a corporation, and they had hunts there for the businesses they worked with. So because of that, they had permanent stands, and that's it. Their guides would take their friends or their business colleagues just to these permanent stands. So they weren't hunting all over the place. There was lots of permanent stands, but so they put GPS collars on deer and looked at where were these deer during the year, and then where were they during the deer season. And what they found was amazing. It was during the year, deer were all over this property. Come deer season, they started avoiding these areas with the permanent stands because that's where the people were, and they knew it. And they had some of their older bucks that were GPS collared that spent 0 minutes of daylight shooting anywhere within gun range of these permanent stands. They just weren't there because they knew, just by the presence of people in and out of that area. So, it didn't matter in some of those places whether a person was actually in the stand or not that day. If somebody had been there earlier in that week or enough times during that year, those deer just avoided those areas. They were all around them at night, during the dark, because a lot of those stands were near food plots. So it was a very, very telling study that showed just how quickly deer react to us being there and how they change their behavior and movement patterns based on that. So yeah, we teach deer very quickly to stay away from the areas that we hunt by us being in those areas on a regular or even a semi-regular basis.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about too was thermals. This is something that I think every time I get on social media, the topic gets more complicated, or someone has to kind of put their unique spin on it. For whatever reason that is. And it's one of those things that I think as maybe Eastern or Central hunters, maybe folks don't put a lot of mental energy on. If you had to explain thermals in layman's term and maybe their importance to a whitetail deer hunter in the Midwest or the East, what would you say to them?
I think thermals are very important. And thermals today are kind of like where the wind was 5 to 10 years ago, where people were, okay, I understand what's going on with the wind and I need to use this to my advantage. That's kind of where we are with thermals now. And in general, I think about, you'll see hawks out, soaring in the sky, and watching them soar, and either go up or down without flapping their wings. It look like they're riding the wind. Those are thermals. And in general, in the morning, when the ground heats up, there is a movement of air from that up higher. And at night, it tends to settle and go the other way. That's why in general, they say, hunt high in the morning and low at night, because thermals rise during the day as the ground temperature heats up from the sun. And at night, as it cools, then the thermals go from high to low. All of those thermals are carrying your scent with them. So think about if you have ever been in a hilly area, maybe there's a little draw that comes like down through the woods, and it's in the evening and you're riding along in the summer and it's nice and warm, and you get to an area and all of a sudden you feel a cool spot. That is a thermal that's dropping, and all of that scent is right down through there. That is something that we can very easily feel. That is going on around us everywhere. And deer are picking up on this because our scent is in all of those thermals. So just as that hawk can ride that thermal and soar up or down, our scent is within that as well. And our scent rises with them and drops with them. And deer pick this up. So understanding the wind is the first step in helping beat the deer's nose. Thermals are like the advanced part of that, where even if the wind is in your favor, if the thermal is taking your scent somewhere else, then that can still alert deer to your presence. A perfect example, a really good friend of mine, really, really accomplished bow hunter, had a stand set up on the side of this hill that he thought would be dynamite. And it was perfect for a morning stand. He would get there, and the first few times deer were blowing or catching his scent, and he was blowing them out. He thought, what in the world is going on? It's in the morning. Scent is rising, and he was above where these deer were coming from. So his scent should be going up and out. So he ended up taking smoke bombs. On the off season, I'm going to take a little, remember the little smoke bombs, you light them and you can see where the smoke goes. They work a lot better than a windicator or milkweed because you can see it a lot farther. Well, what he found was in the morning, when he would get there at daylight or just after daylight, even though the thermals are rising in the morning, this hillside was such that it took the ground there longer to heat up than he had expected. So it took a couple, 3 hours after daylight. Even though you think of thermals rising in the morning, those thermals continued to fall until about 9 a.m. Then they would rise. So what was happening is he was getting busted between daylight and 9 a.m. from deer below him because the thermals were still dropping. Even though the wind was in his favor, those thermals were taking his scent down. So what he did is he figured this out. He never went to that stand until after about 9 a.m. So what happened is deer below him, they're there in good cover. He would sneak around, get in his stand at 9 a.m. rather than before daylight. By then, the thermals are rising. His scent is going up. Deer never knew he was there. And then he started killing some really nice deer from that stand. It was all about the thermals. So even though the wind was in his favor, the terrain there changed the way the thermals were. And so they were taking his scent right to him. So hunters who are just a casual hunter, they're going to be like, I don't care about this at all. That's, I don't need to understand that. And it's not difficult. It just takes a little more ground truthing, to realize what is really going on here. So if you're a casual hunter in general, think about this: hunt higher in the morning, hunt lower at night, relative to a hillside or something. And most of the thermals will work in your favor. If you're really into this and you're an avid deer hunter, you can figure this out on a stand by stand basis and be able to figure out, like my buddy did, the best time to get to that spot to make sure those thermals are working in your favor. And the thing is, if you have the right wind and you have figured out how those thermals are, that is almost a dynamite setup from deer, like almost a foolproof setup, relative to, because they are so in tune to wind, thermals, and all of that, that they use that to their advantage. So if you can find a spot that literally beats that, and there's, those spots aren't everywhere, but like my buddy, he found one like that. It was an unbelievably productive stand because the deer were less pressured there. They thought everything was in their favor. The thermals allowed my buddy to have an advantage over that and kill some really nice bucks there because of it.
I think that's greatly put and very well stated. And hopefully folks can take something away from that and put it contextually into where they actually hunt and use that information. But, we've talked about deer sense of smell and their nose for almost an hour now. Let's bring this full circle. Since they do have this awesome device on the front of their face that, ends up with a lot more of them alive than we would prefer, we can use this against them. And growing up, I watched my dad use a sock soaked with pee wrapped to the end of his boot. And I've watched many bucks walk up a trail and get shot with a muzzleloader or a rifle that way. Can you talk, or from your perspective, what are some of the best ways that we can use a deer's great sense of smell against them to maybe harvest more in a hunting scenario?
I think that folks have been very successful with the sense like you just talked about, either having some type of scent, urine, gland scent, whatever, on them as they're walking through the woods, where some of that gets, because that's how deer, follow each other. You mentioned earlier the interdigital gland, the one in between the hooves there. Mm-hmm. Every step a deer takes, they're leaving scent. That's how other deer follow them. That's how coyotes follow them. So deer are very attuned to, smelling what's going on and then either following that scent or, being curious about it. So hunters have done that with scent that they walk around with. Hunters have done that with either urine or other scents at a scrape, where they're hunting. Some people will use that to attract a deer to a certain area. Some people may hunt over a scrape and will use additional scent near that just to stop a deer in a spot that provides a really good angle to shoot. So, some folks don't care at all to use scent and just don't want to be bothered with it. And there's a lot of deer killed, without the use of that. But for people who like that part or like to add that element to their hunt, you can have a ton of fun with that. Same thing, with decoys and rattling and calling. So there's lots of different ways we can kill deer. And some people just enjoy certain pieces more than others. But since deer are such an olfactory based animal, that sense of smell, there are absolutely scents that we can use, in the deer world to help attract them to a certain area. And like you mentioned there with your dad, sometimes we can either even have them follow us all the way to our stand by dragging some scent along the way.
So if you had to kind of summarize everything that we talked about and you had to put it into 2 or 3 tips, what would your top 2 or 3 tips be for beating a deer's sense of smell?
I think that first, it's just to acknowledge that is their primary scent that we need to beat. We cannot move and beat their eyes. We can be quiet and beat their ears. The nose is the number one thing that we need to beat. So knowing that, I think the tips I put together is one is absolutely pay attention to the wind. I do not deer hunt a single day of the year where I'm not paying attention to the wind or picking where I'm going based on what the wind is doing. So that is, I think, by far the biggest. And if hunters, new hunters, experienced hunters, and everybody in between, if they do that every day, they will be more successful over the totality of the season. So pay attention to the wind for sure. 2, use whatever scent control, products you want that could help make you feel more confident, but don't take away from the hunt by making it too regimented. And I know people who are professional hunters that swear by, a very regimented regime, and they are highly successful. And I know professional hunters who are highly successful that do almost none of that. So I don't think it is required, but I think that there are some advantages to using those, and particularly if it makes you feel a little more confident, there's something to be said for that. So, and the third thing would be, hey, the next step in this process would be paying a little more attention to thermals and figuring out how you can use those to your advantage. So that's kind of tips A and B. And then, the advanced tip, once you feel you're ready for it or once you want to try something new.
Yeah, we've had Bronson Strickland on, we had you on, we've had Matt on, we're fixing to have Gino on, and I think it's going to be unanimous answer to this question. But if you could take away one deer sense forever to help you increase the amount that you're going to kill over your lifetime, I think I know what it is, but what would that sense be?
It certainly would be the nose. It would allow me to get a lot closer to more deer if they didn't have that sense of smell. However, that'd be pretty short-sighted of me because I love to hunt deer and eat deer, and I hope I get to do that for a long time. And if we took that scent or that sense away, we wouldn't have anywhere near the numbers of deer we have in a very short time. So certainly that's what they use the best. And from a hunting end, that would help us the most if they couldn't do it. But the flip side of that is I'm pretty glad that is as advanced as it is in deer for the challenge for us, but also then just to ensure that, that deer are great survivors. And that is why they have done, they're the oldest deer species we have. They are way older if you look at, across time than moose, elk, everything else. And one of the big reasons for that is that sense of smell. So I hope they have that for several more million years as well.
Yeah, it sure makes the chase more fun. But I want to thank you for your time for coming on. I want to wrap up with this. You guys do some awesome work at the National Deer Association. You're always sharing research. You're always sharing a bunch of resources that help us make better decisions, become better hunters. Where can folks connect with you personally if they want to stay connected with you? And where can they become a member of the National Deer Association like I am? I really enjoy being a member. How can they do that?
Well, thank you for that. And I appreciate the kind words. They can, if they have questions, they can get with me, Kip at deerassociation.com. That's just KIP at deerassociation.com. I'm happy to answer any emails. And our website is deerassociation.com. They can get any of the free articles, videos, materials, etc. there. They can become a member there. Stay in tune, with what we have going on and all the information. So it's a great resource for deer, and nobody fights harder for deer or deer hunters than we do. So we'd love to have folks come and check our stuff out.
Thank you guys so much for checking out the Hunter's Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next episode.